Earlier this month, you reintroduced the Fifth Amendment Integrity Restoration Act, also known as the FAIR Act, with Representative Jamie Raskin. Can you give us a history behind the legislation?
Well, this legislation goes back at least 3 terms now, including this one, with an effort to get it brought forward and more people to understand what civil asset forfeiture is, that it's not criminal asset forfeiture. These are people that have been brought in under civil laws, at least perceived that way. And the problem that we've found out is that in most cases, they have not been given any due process. Their assets have been seized for sometimes dubious reasons or certainly unknown reasons. And then they have to spend significant time to get their resources, whether it's their property or whether it's personal assets or money, back. And in most cases, we find out that they should never have been charged with anything. And it's mounted up, and I think now more and more people on both sides of the aisle are understanding it and see it as something that needs to be fixed. We don't want to hurt law enforcement, don't want to take resources away from them that they could appropriately have, but we also want to make sure that civil rights are held up as they ought to be. So that was the issue, and it came to the point that both sides of the aisle, and in this case, Jamie Raskin, a Democrat, and myself, a Republican, both saw the concerns. And like I said, for the past now 3 terms, we've been working toward the solution, been developing allies. The last term of Congress, which got caught up in things like January 6th and the like. Yet we still had the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, as well as the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, along with the Freedom Caucus and the Progressive Caucus, the Squad, and other members who were supporting my bill and were co-sponsors of the bill. So we're very hopeful that this time, this term, we'll be able to get it across the line.
I do even want to take a step back further. You've been working on this now for about 6 years. So where did the initial inspiration come from?
We began hearing reports about violations of individual rights and liberties and the violation of due process. The first one I heard was a small grocer, inner city, who was required by his insurance company, if he wanted to have coverage for any loss of his receipts on a daily basis, that they would only cover up to $10,000 per day. So dutifully, when he reached that level, he would head to the local bank and deposit his $10,000. And of course, all of a sudden that became a normal deposit number, and it crossed the boundaries under laws that are in place to make sure that money laundering, et cetera, are picked up. And so all of a sudden he was picked up, his $35,000 of assets were frozen, and he spent the next several years trying to get it back. And for a small grocer, $35,000 of assets could be a death knell for his success. Then we heard about a young man who'd saved up $16,000 to try to make it out in Hollywood, in the production field, and got on a train and was heading toward Los Angeles and stopped in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And federal agents boarded the train and ultimately took his $16,000 from him, taking away life savings going toward developing a career. We've heard of other stories like that, and then ultimately constituents who had friends, children who were in college or just started out after college and were depositing. All of a sudden, assets were frozen and a difficulty in getting them back. So we decided we'd pick it up. We had conversations with a number of entities dealing with justice, such as the International Justice Foundation and an Institute for Justice. And we picked the bill up thinking that it would be a pretty easy sale. It hasn't been. But like I said, over the course of time, as we've educated more people to understand it, that we're not taking attack at law enforcement authorities. We may feel very, very frustrated with the FBI, who have sometimes used it egregiously. Most recently with a lady who had decided in Los Angeles she was going to protect herself against spending what she was saving to purchase a home, decided to make a long story short, to put it in a safe deposit box 30 minutes away from her residence, making it very difficult for her to get at it and spend it. And all of a sudden, that business that had the vaults for the security was raided by the FBI. And for 2 years now, she's been trying to get her $40,200 back, and has finally decided through the Institute for Justice to file a class action lawsuit to get it back. And the FBI did not carry out the terms that the judge allowed them to do the search and seizure of the facility. And as far as I know, many people have been impacted by this, and that's the type of thing we have to go after.
Congressman, what you're describing now, you're describing civil asset forfeiture laws as basically guilty until proven innocent, which is the opposite of what it should be. So why isn't this an easy sell?
I don't know why. To me, it seems common sense. It seems that people on the left and right should accept this, and any member of Congress who is taking some pressure from local law enforcement entities, saying that this will hurt them from being able to get after money laundering, drug sales, etc., and then not be able to use those assets for additional law enforcement resources. They really aren't telling the truth to legislators, but legislators sometimes get brought in on that. I, for one, want to make sure that our law enforcement agencies have all the resources that they legally should have, and that local communities, state legislatures, and the federal government, Congress, should make sure that our law enforcement are given the resources necessary to do their jobs. But that does not come at taking away First Amendment liberties and taking away the right to due process and the right to be considered innocent until proven guilty, and to have assets taken and held at the expense of in many cases, unaccused individuals. And so it has been a bit frustrating, but like I said, I think we have grown in the ability over the last several years of having people educated to what this really is doing. And I, for one, have had very little pushback from law enforcement now, since they know what's in place. There's another thing that has been used. Michigan, for instance, ultimately, when they found out about this, subsequent to my bill being introduced, the Michigan legislature did a reform on civil asset forfeiture and really put in place what we want to put in place with this federal law. But there's still a problem that the federal authorities, like the FBI, can have equitable asset sharing process by which they go to the local authorities and say, if you help us on this particular drug bust or money laundering scheme, we will provide you with sharing of the resources that come from the bust in the end. That goes around the state laws, puts the local authorities in concert with the federal investigation entity, and we end up violating what the intentions are of the state legislature, specifically in Michigan, on this. So this bill would also do away with that, or put strings on equitable sharing opportunities using federal and local or state law enforcement resources.
I do want to talk about equitable sharing, because that, to me, when I was researching your legislation here, it seems like a pretty big loophole that directly benefits state and local enforcement agencies. Right. So what are those strings you would put in place aside from abolishing that?
Well, it's pretty much abolishing it. It says you still come under the state laws in this place, and you can't do an end around unless there's a clear and pressing need that a separate judge would give that opportunity. So it puts restrictions in place really that you already have with criminal asset forfeiture. It still allows the tool, which we want to be there. But in this case, we want to make sure that a private citizen is cared for in the same way you would do one who has already been judged by the court of law to be of criminal intent, and the assets are then frozen or stolen, not stolen, taken, because the person is guilty. This is not the case with the certainly illustrations I've given to you already today. To have civil asset forfeiture and then a leverage point, a pushing point coming from the federal law enforcement agents to get around state law by having civil asset forfeiture under federal statutes, and equitable sharing that takes place is really just a loophole that is being used improperly, and really, I would say, against the letter as well as the spirit of the law.